seat. Thank you very much. And so I'll be giving the service today. So I'll just kind of jump right into it. Um, and actually, I really kind of wanted to discuss very directly, or maybe it's more indirectly, but at least start off discussing about kind of what's happening in Korea for people that have maybe aren't aware. I kind of sent it in the email. But just to put very shortly, the Korean government is investigating the church as an organization. It's investigating the church leadership. And, I think it's been a few months now. There was kind of a travel restriction placed on Mother because she is one of the people that might be testifying in the court case. So, of course, on the back of what happened with the Japanese church and the dissolution of the Jap, it's on the back of what happening with Japan. It's a frustrating feeling for like the government to then kind of target us again, right? And of course, it's in one sense, I guess we're used to it, right? The church has always dealt with kind of controversy and being seen as negative press as well as kind of government let's say overreach, right? But it hasn't really been kind of direct from the government sense about the 80s, right? When they put Father in Danbury, and that kind of ended it, right? Or it didn't end it, but it really reduced it because honestly, we kind of made that event a success and it kind of pushed the church forward, right? Because the religious leaders in America rallied around us. And it really became a kind of success story in the growth of our church and how we dealt with being targeted, right? And of course, that was on Father because Father's attitude was, I'm happy to go to prison, right? I'm happy to go to prison for the sake of God's providence. I'm happy to, you know, he had an opportunity to avoid the whole trial by staying in Korea, but we know that's not Father's attitude. That's not, how he faces controversy, right? So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I wanted to just share a few of the stories of kind of Father's approach and attitude, and how our church has dealt with being kind of treated uh, as a cult, as a kind of dangerous organization, a danger to society, right? Um, and also looking into the future, like how do we prepare for that, or how do we deal with it, right? Like what's the right attitude to have as a community that follows true parents and as trying to follow that example, right? So what's frustrating, obviously, is that it's, a large part of this is always the narrative, right? The angle that's being presented, or the way the media is portraying it, or the way people perceive it, right? And in a way, especially if you look back at when Father was building the church in Korea, and then all these rumors come. If you look at North Korea, for example, when he was arrested and sent to Hungnam, of course, the communist government was trying to put all religious leaders into prison, right? But it wasn't the communist government that came and arrested Father first. Father was preaching in North Korea and was very, very successful. And then what happened is the other churches were jealous and reported him to the Korean government, the North Korean government. And then they came and arrested him, right? So it's it's always this almost perception in society, right? It's not just that the government attacks us, but there's a certain group of people that are threatened by us or challenged by us, right? Then, of course, the nature of evil is to make good things look evil and evil things look good, right? That's where the kind of secular press comes in and really plays that role and kind of takes every angle and every position and tries to make it look as negative as possible. So one of the things about when Father went into Hungnam is, he had built up a following, and always there's that very amazing image of him kind of in handcuffs, and he's going to essentially a death sentence. And he's kind of like smiling and waving at his followers, and he's like putting his chains up as if he's like, I've won almost. That's kind of like how he's saying, right? And that's a very powerful message about father's attitude about being sent to prison, right? And he always was, he wasn't afraid to go to prison. He wasn't afraid of prison because he knew not just that God was on his side. It's not the whole point of when he went to Hungnam is it wasn't like God will protect me, but almost that he knew he would find a way to survive because he understood the principle. And instead, his prayer was like, God, don't worry about me. I'll make it. I'll find a way. And he did, right? And it was very, Hungnam was another moment in our church history where Father kind of brought a victory and showed the standard, right? And it was similar obviously when Father came to the US, and initially he was well received, right? He did interviews on TV. So, one of my favorite interviews I've is when he was like, I forgot the name of the interviewer now, Al Cap, right? And it's just a very kind of fun interview. And the guy was very cordial and fair to him, and they had a really good banter and stuff, right? And then Father did these massive like rally. He gave these speeches and massive rallies, and then it just the press came in and brought all this kind of Korean historical negativity and just ran with it. So we had this long period of genuine persecution, right? When basically my parents joined the church, it was always a battle, right? A constant battle to be a member of the Unification Church or a Moonie, right? Um, and yeah, so it was just this, and that kind of culminated then in the government going after Father on these tax charges. And, they sent him the notice when he was out of the country because they wanted him to not come back in. He didn't have to come back in. He didn't have to go to trial. He could have stayed in Korea and skipped the whole thing, right? But he came back because he hadn't done anything wrong. He wasn't running away, and he wanted to face the justice system. Um, but it was very unjust, right? And I've studied the kind of tax evasion case, and like I'm pretty familiar with the details. Also, actually, in the kind of what year would that have been? Somewhere in the 2000s, there was an attempt to maybe have it re-brought up and overturned because we had new information. And my dad was speaking to some of the lawyers on that case because he was also a lawyer at the time, right? And there was a lot of evidence that it was intentional to use the tax code to like get him out of the country, right? And that was kind of new evidence that potentially, if we wanted to go through the whole process again, we could have tried to get it overturned, right? So it was really like it was very unjust, and I really want to find this video because I feel it's such a powerful video, and I don't know if everyone's seen it, but there's a video of Mother when Father was put into prison. And I realized like she would have been around my age at that time. She looks really young, so I didn't realize it when I first saw the video. But she's about somewhere near 40 when Father goes to Danbury. And she's speaking to the members, and Father had just been put to prison. And she says it in Korean, but she says, "Today's a day I wish was erased from history," right? That was kind of her wording. And it really struck with me because, I think Mother's really expressing the unjustness of it, the damage it does, right, to our movement and to God's providence. Because since that day, every single article I've ever read in English calls Father a convicted felon for tax evasion, right? Like they just put that line in as like automatically. And it's really like, it is damaging, right? It has been damaging to our ability to grow as a movement, to reach people. Like in the modern internet age, every time we witness, people look us up right away. And so almost like from the moment you tell someone anything connected to the Unification Church, Family Fed, UPF, they look it up and they kind of have to make a decision based on what they see, right? So it's I'm kind of giving these different examples, right, of where in one way, that's what I was saying. In one way, we're used to being targeted. We're used to people misunderstanding who we are and what we're doing, right? Um, and I remember one time, and it also really kind of moved me, really kind of impacted me. I was just talking to my father, right, about the these kind of things, and he told me this story about when he was fundraising in Philadelphia, so Pennsylvania. Sorry, Pennsylvania is a state in the U.S., and so that's where he fundraised during his fundraising time. So he said he did every town in Pennsylvania like 2 or 3 times, to the point when he went there the next year, sometimes they remembered him, right? uh, but they had this problem where the local um, government wouldn't give them a permit to go fundraising. They say you have to get a permit. So they would go to the local government office to get a permit, and then they wouldn't give us a permit because the Jehovah Witnesses had recently won a case where you don't need a permit to practice your religious belief, right? And fundraising is you're allowed to go door to door for religious reasons without a permit, right? So they were using this to like stop us from fundraising. They'd know we were coming. They're like, the Moonies are coming to town, and they would kind of not let us have a permit and then stop us and say we needed to have a permit. So my dad was like, the only thing I could do was get arrested, right? So he would get arrested. They'd bring him to the courthouse, he'd keep fundraising, and then they'd put him in the county jail for a night or a couple hours, right? And like stop fundraising. But because he got arrested and there was like a record of us applying, then he could go to the judge, and the judge would be look at this, like, he got arrested for fundraising, but you won't give him a permit. Like, stop it, right? And so then he could fundraise again. But it took him having to go to jail to be able to like, or for like a county jail, in order to fundraise, right? And he did that a few times, and then finally, like, they just stopped doing it because they're all connected, they all know each other. So it's all these small towns. So it's just, but the thing was, he was willing to go to jail, right? To kind of fundraise and to, to support what he believed in, to support God's providence, right? Um, so hopefully our UPA missionaries don't have to go to jail for a day or two, um, but that was, yeah, so that was kind of the lifestyle of the early members, right? It's just wherever they went, they were treated like they were dangerous or that they were harmful to people, right? Um, but they really believed in what they were doing, and they kept doing it, right? It didn't phase them almost in a way, right? Or it did phase them, but they had to, that was part of their kind of training and their life of faith, right? Um, and then another thing my dad told me that really impacted me is he said that if the whole church kind of fell apart, let's say, your parents passed away, and the whole thing just crumbled to the ground, he's like, me and your mom will just try to rebuild the church ourselves, right? That was kind of their heart, their attitude, right? That it almost didn't matter what people did to us or what happened. They weren't going to change their faith and their belief. And that actually really moved me. That really impacted me. That helped give me, let's say, confidence, even in my own faith, that it doesn't matter how society sees us, right? It matters what we believe and what we're trying to do. And sometimes we do have to fight against against the kind of, let's call it societal structure, or against, in one sense, the evil of the world, right? Um, so the other thing that really, when I was reading Father's autobiography or when I was studying Father's life, one thing about when Father left Hungnam is he had his followers, right? And then he was in Hungnam for almost 2 years, and he came out. It was kind of the middle of the Korean War, and he was trying to find his followers, right? And even he had followers from Hungnam, right, that were kind of supporting him, but he couldn't really find anyone. I think it was he had one disciple that he could find, and he traveled south with. Might have been one Pil Kim, but it might have been I might be remembering that wrong. Um, and so when he came down to Busan, he kind of had to just start over. It was just him and Wonpil Kim, and they were in Busan in the little hut, and he was writing the principle, and that was the start of the church, right? In a way, right? And that's when the first members kind of really joined, and that was the start of building again the actual church community. Um, and it really reminded me of when in the story of the Bible, when Jesus is getting arrested, right? And there's like two different accounts of it. So one of the account he just kind of gets arrested, and one of the accounts, one of the disciples tries to defend him and like chops off the ear, right, of the guard. Um, but in both cases, after Jesus gets arrested, his disciples scatter, right? They just kind of run away and disappear. And I always remember Father mentioned about that point is that if the disciples had insisted on getting arrested with Jesus, if they had been crucified with Jesus, we would have a completely different Christianity than we have today, right? It was kind of in that moment they fled, right? Um, and even, the story of Peter is very famous where he denies Jesus 3 times, right? And Father said, you couldn't avoid the cross at that point, right? Jesus had to go away the way of the cross. But the disciples, if they really understood why Jesus had to go to the cross, if they understood his heart, they should have joined him on the cross, right? They should have insisted almost that they go with him, right? And that became the culture of Christianity still, the culture of martyrdom, right? Willing to die for Jesus. And part of me is very like, I really hope the age of martyrdom is over, right? I hope no one has to die for for true parents, right? I hope that we've kind of the providence has advanced enough that we're beyond that, right? Um, but it does bring up, in this situation, the reason it's impacted me so much is I don't think I really don't think mother will get arrested, right? I just don't think that's a realistic outcome of what's happening. But even the fact that it's within like a realm of possibility really bothers me, like on a very personal level, right? It's really frustration isn't really the right word, even. It's almost like it feels like a personal attack, right? Again, it feels very like unjust, right? I almost, if something like that happened, I feel like my reaction would be, I wish this day was removed from history, right? Like it's like, um, yeah, getting a tiny glimpse of almost like how mother might have felt when father was taken to Danbury, right? It was so blatantly unnecessary, and it was so blatantly unjust and so politically motivated, right? And everything I'm reading about this current situation is bringing up that feeling of like, this is so unfair. This is so like, I don't want to say silly because silly almost is like a silly word to use, but it's like wrong, right? It's very wrong and it feels wrong. Um, and so, but then it does kind of bring up this feeling of me that like, then what should I do, right? Like, what is my responsibility in this situation? Um, and kind of thinking of the history of the church and thinking about all these things that happened, right? Is it, um, am I happy to go to jail if that's what it takes, right? And it reminds me, and I think my answer is yes. I hope I don't have to prove that point, but if I do end up in jail, like I've thought about it a lot and I'm ready for it. And the accusations are false, whatever they come up with. But I mean, whatever it is, right? But I mean, a year, 2 years. Father was less than 2 years in Hungnam, so I should be able to do 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, like whatever God needs, right? That's kind of my. But I'm hoping God doesn't need it, right? But the thing about um, sorry, train of thought. if I have to go to jail. Um, yeah, essentially. So I'm trying to think about what should be my heart in this situation, right? And also what can I do, if anything, right? Because in some ways it's not so directly connected. It's a very kind of Korean political thing. But yeah, it feels like a personal attack. It really feels like this is yeah, it's very unfair, it's very unjust. And so, but then how do we deal with that? What's the kind of principled way to deal with that situation? Oh, yeah, sorry. So I had been thinking a lot because it also reminds me when the LGBTQ push has been happening, let's say for about the last 10 years, right? Part of me felt there's always been moral degradation, right? Like when I grew up, it was a very secular culture, very sexualized culture. It's in every movie, right? My dad's always closing my eyes every movie when any chapter two scene comes on, or even if anyone's kissing and they're not married, right? He said if they're married, it's okay. But so it's like, so I always had this concept that, well, everything is kind of wrong and I need to avoid it. So it wasn't that part of it I was worried about so much. To me, it was kind of like, okay, let people do whatever they want. It just means that it's not good for them. Their lives might be more difficult. They're going to have less kids. But like, in terms of my situation with society, it's still the same. I still have to like be different and avoid whatever they're teaching is the way people should live, right? But the part I was worried about was when it came to the conflict between religious freedom and this kind of ideology. Because the way things were going for a while, I could very clearly see a point where governments would pass legislation where you can't say, even as a church, that you don't believe in homosexuality, right? That would be seen as a crime or a hate crime, right? And that's what I was kind of most worried about. Um, because we don't let gay people go to the blessing, for example. So would that mean that our church could no longer be a church in this country, right? Could they pass legislation where like any church that doesn't accept gay marriage can't be registered to give marriage, right? Um, and so we're little protected from that in Ireland because the Catholic Church would have to change that stance, or the Irish government would have to intentionally decide to ban the Catholic Church. So I think that was probably a bridge too far. But you don't know, right? That's still like a future possibility if things change too much, right? So I was thinking about that at that time, right? Like would the church eventually have to go underground, right? Or like we wouldn't be allowed to have services and stuff, right? Which in some countries that is like for other reasons, our church does have to operate that way. So so yeah, so I guess for me the kind of conclusion here was, whatever happens, right? Whatever happens in Korea, whatever the outcome of that is, it's this kind of heart of, the disciples when Father went into Hungnam. Do we scatter or do we keep, you know, do we have the faith within us? Do we have the standard within us? The same with Jesus's disciples when he gets arrested and killed even. Do we scatter or is our heart to go on the cross with him, right? Um, and it brings me into my last point, which is, then what is the church, right? And the title I had written down, and as I think people who've heard me speak before know, I tend not to share my titles or save them to the end, is, the church starts and ends with me. And what I mean by that is it's kind of my dad's comment and that kind of attitude, and that's a spirit I tried to cultivate, is that if the church stops existing, I'll try to rebuild it almost, right? It's like I believe in true parents. I believe in the principle. And because of that, um, I believe that the church will always continue. The church will always go on if there's blessed couples that can come together and meet. And I'm not very pessimistic. I don't believe like everything's going to collapse and, Uh, I believe actually things are going very well and will be very successful. But when this kind of pressure comes on us and this kind of government criticism and cultural attacks come, it just makes me think about kind of the basic principles, right? Um, and so, of course, each house has a temple, so technically a church. This is the idea of home church, right? So, um, but I also actually really would defend and believe in the church as an institution, right? And this is something that I think maybe a lot of people disagree with, or there's like debate about it. But for me, it's very, very clear the value of the church as an institution, as like, and what I mean by that is like a structure that people can follow, a kind of institution that protects us. I kind of alluded to it with my Catholic Church comment, right? The Catholic Church is established as a part of Irish society, as part of Irish history, and even as part, in a way, of Irish politics, right? Um, and how many people have seen the Da Vinci Code? I think it's the Da Vinci Code. There's and it might have been Angels and Demons. I get the two mixed up, but there's a scene in that movie that I don't think was in the book because I read the books as well, but where the main character is like talking to the head of the guard who he's been going around with the whole time. He said, "Oh, your church did this," right? He was like making a point about what they were investigating in some corruption. And the response was a bit defensive from this head of the guard, but he's like, "My church." He's like, my church feeds and clothes the homeless. My church gives hope to millions, right? My church elevates people and gives them purpose. What does your church do, right? And it was a very powerful line for me because I felt like, it's very easy to criticize. Like that's what I took from it. This man is going around. He's investigating some corrupt part of the Catholic Church. It's a fictional story anyway, but he's criticizing the whole institution of the church, and this man is defending it, right? And and again, I kind of believe in that, if that makes sense. I believe in the institution of the church as a body that protects us, right? That gives us structure. And as in everything, I believe there needs to be balance. Of course, we have to have our own culture. We have our family culture. We have our Irish community culture. And I think criticisms of the institution happen when those start to come in conflict, right? There's too much centralized control. Like Korea is telling us how we should run everything, how we should run our own community. Then it becomes a bit too much like overbearing, right? It's like stepping outside of its bounds, right? But at the same time, we do need kind of that centralized structure, right? Because what is the church except all of us multiplied by however many people are committed to it, right? Like the leaders in the church, I meet when I go to Champion, right? I know them on like a personal level. It's not making is the church leadership, right, is also blessed couples. They're also people who believe in true parents and are following true parents and are trying their best, right? Um, so so yeah, so the kind of conclusion I'm trying to come to here, and it's not um I'm always happy to kind of maybe talk about it on a more personal level or one-to-one, but the conclusion I kind of want to share with everyone is, yes, we have our own faith and we have to represent the faith. So when I say, we are the church, we are the church. We have to represent your parents. We have to be able and willing to carry on if there are problems or if things start to go bad. But at the same time, my dad said that, but I also know that if that actually happened, my dad and mom wouldn't be able to rebuild the church, right? They were good people, very dedicated members, but they weren't true parents, right? They had their shortcomings. I have my shortcomings, right? So in a way, it's the right heart and the right attitude, but at the same time they need true parents to be there. They need the institution then that true parents built. And I guess that's the other thing that is very important for me is true parents built the church. They built the institution. They built the structures. They built the palace, right? Um, so in a way, that's a natural evolution of true parents' work. And they also, I really see what Mother's doing is to try to build that structure so it can continue, right? That it has momentum and moves forward when she moves to spirit world. So again, it's very much there needs to be balance. But I guess the thing I wanted to share, I hope people can reflect on and think about, is that there's incredible value that we get from the institution of the church, right? And there's always sometimes a sentiment that like, oh, I'm spiritual or not religious, or you know, um, I'm an independent blessed couple that can follow the movement, right? I've seen some blogs on that by some members, right? And for me, like, good luck and more power to them, but I just don't believe that's possible, right? That's kind of where I'm coming down. So just, I hope everyone can reflect on this point. Also, please obviously pray for what's going on in Korea and continue praying for what's been going on in Japan. And, of course, there's many other countries where we face this kind of opposition or kind of being blocked from the government to practice our faith. But ultimately, like I think, like I said, I'm always very optimistic. So it's I have a lot of faith that God's will is always moving forward, and the trick is for us to figure out how to push it forward a little faster, right? That's kind of how I see my role and the role of each of us, right? Um, so just as we have this bit of adversity, I don't think it'll be as bad as it's ever been in the past because I think we've passed a certain point, and I think it just gives us a chance or a moment to kind of pause and reflect and really try to understand what we can do, what our own attitude is, and this kind of relationship between the church as a structure, as a group of people, as like a structure and a tradition that we try to follow, and our own kind of personal lives of faith, and maybe how we connect the two, how we strengthen the two a bit more. Okay. So thank you everyone for taking the time today. I'll close with a prayer and then we'll finish up.